Well, the sensual passions, I think, are probably pretty straightforward. Those would be, you know, lustful sins, but it can also go into gluttony, which is anything related to the senses. Believe it or not, we can also have like spiritual gluttony if we become like, if we come out of balance, you know, in our spiritual path. That can happen too. So you know, you can have you know, excess in food, excess in sex, excess in any type of sensual experience. And so that can involve any of these types of things where you become immoderate and it's not in balance and it's not in alignment with moral law, with your status in life. It's important also to keep in mind that we all know too that people have many different circumstances, and it's important to always point out that God understands that, you know, so people do not, we don't want people to become scrupulous either, where they're just picking themselves apart and they don't think they can ever measure up. God understands that we have complicated circumstances in our lives. So then you talked about the rational passions. The rational passions would be, I mean, this would be going possibly into the greed, you know, in immoderate use of money. This could be money hoarding. This could be where, you know, things like this, where people are doing crazy things with wealth. And let me think now too of some other good examples of the rational. I mean, you could also, there are other ways that you could, other things that you could throw in this box, but again, these are examples again. Let's not put them in a box and make them cut and carved in stone. But, you know, so people can take just about anything and make it immoderate. You know what I mean? So we can take not working and make it immoderate. You know what I mean? Refusing to be employed, we can do that. We can also take working and make it immoderate, where we can become workaholics. We can do that with alcohol or any other substance, drugs. We can do that with any of the things that we particularly like. You know, people can get addicted to a lot of things. Some people are addicted to exercise. Some people are addicted to certain types of entertainment. Some people are addicted to, I mean, there's a lot of manifestations of this. So people have to look in their own life and see, do I have a rational passion that's out of control? That is something that, when it is moderated properly, is a good in my life, but when it is immoderate, it is no longer a good. It actually causes destruction and harm. And that's kind of how you look at it.
Intellectual passions?
The intellectual passions are, these can manifest in a lot of other ways as well. You can have, but again, see, everything can be, things that are good in moderation can become immoderate. And so, like, for instance, someone who's addicted to schooling and will never stop going to school. In a moderate nature, going to school is a good thing. It's a good. But If someone doesn't recognize, and we'll go back to cycles of time and endpoints, if someone is having trouble with these adjustments through to different stages and phases of their existence, they can become immoderate, and they stay in this phase because it's the only thing familiar to them, and they'll just keep going to school forever. You can have intellectual passions that can translate into people loving to hear themselves talk. And there can be another way that this can manifest, which is the, gosh, this is a hard one to put into words, but it's the, you know, where a person who sees himself or herself as smarter than, better than, and is always seeking to best others in the intellectual capacity. This can be a person who might literally look for things to pick out in the character or the efforts of others to criticize. And it will often be based on, this is superior intellectual thinking, right? And so there are a lot of ways that can manifest, where, again, with all of those, you want to look for attitudes and behaviors that in moderation are absolute goods, but in immoderation can become very destructive and hurtful, or just destructive. You know, it just depends on the different ways that people manifest them. And, you know, these things can be addictions as well, you know, so all addictions would fall under these kinds of things: sex addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, food addiction. You know, there's a lot of different ways that people can get addicted. People can be addicted to other things as well, you know, that they then choose to pursue immoderately, and it becomes either a crutch or a replacement for something real or something more meaningful that could be utilized and occurring in that time that is being lost now.
Exactly. Because these can be really just, they're impediments to our potential. And so an intellectual pursuit somebody could really, in a left brain way, just really master something, but because they threw themselves into that thing that's so earthbound or whatever, potentially, or whatever, that they totally missed this whole other part of themselves. Because they were the master. They were so brilliant, but it was like, yeah, there's this whole other part. Remember? It's like, huh? Oh, yeah.
Well, you know, a good example of a moderate manifestation of that would be Einstein, because Einstein was brilliant, intellectually brilliant, but he was also a thinker and a dreamer and aware of this spiritual thrust. And so there was this, you know, and I don't know enough about his personal life to say anything about that, but the whole thing was this, there was a balance in the intellectual part of his pursuit with an awareness of this spiritual aspect that he was very humble about and never denied, you know, in his scientific studies. It was a part of it, and that was that would be what would be a moderate good. Whereas, you know, where you might see, like even with some scientists, where it's all got to be on the ground, and therefore they throw out anything, you know, that might be incoming from the spirit world, which is unfortunate because everything comes in from the spiritual worlds. So, so all new discoveries will be coming in from the spiritual world. So it's very unfortunate if we go that way, because those new discoveries will come through that way. You know, so
Well, yeah, with Einstein and using more of the whole brain, using the intellect and the imaginative right brain, then it's just they work together and
yeah,
it's synergistic. And so we just, we get to go further that
right.
way. Now, I want to go into concussable and irascible powers. Does that ring a bell?
Concusible. Let's see. I'm gonna have to.
Or we can revisit it later.
Because I know you're not pronouncing that. Are you talking about concupiscence?
I was listening to it on the Audible, and he said it
So
two
maybe
different.
he didn't pronounce it right.
Well, he
Or
said it two
she.
different ways. Concussable was the second way he said it.
Okay. Okay.
Concusible, does that sound right?
Yeah, that might be right.
And
You
irascible?
know. Um,
I'm not a master on concupiscence.
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 Yes, concupiscence. Well, yes. Well, let's see. Concupiscence is usually related to, but unfortunately, concupiscible is a different theological term. So let me just take a look here. I'm looking it up because I don't want to tell you the backwards thing here.
I just think these nuances, if we're really going to go deep, we might as well, touch
Yeah.
as deep as we can.
Okay. What? Okay, the base, I'm going to tell you what I'm finding here, just because this is from St. Thomas Aquinas, who is the theologian to ask. So, so the irascible appetite is an emergency appetite aroused when simple movements towards a sensible good or away from a sensible evil are impeded by some obstacle. The irascible appetite is aroused precisely to overcome the obstacle. But the concupiscible passions are different. And let me just open this up from the irascible. Okay, so the passions in the, okay. Joy and sorrow are in the concupiscible part of the human passions. All the passions are in the concupiscible part and not some in the irascible, others in the concupiscible. Okay, now this is where I'm gonna have to go down here, because Thomas Aquinas did things differently than other theologians in that he presents ideas and then he presents all these objections. So he has all the contrary opinions and then he gives his summary of the conclusions he comes to after all of those objections. So what he says is, I answer that the passions of the irascible part differ in species from those of the concupiscible faculty, for since different powers have different objects, the passions of different powers must of necessity be referred to different objects. Much more, therefore, do the passions of different faculties differ in species. And let me see if he goes specifically to, in order, therefore, to discern which passions are in the irascible and which are in the concupiscible, we must take the object of each of these powers, that the object of the concupiscible power is sensible good or evil, simply apprehended, something that causes pleasure or pain, but the soul must of necessity experience difficulty or struggle at times in acquiring that good or avoiding that evil. So the concupiscible passions are these passions that are utilized to overcome the good and avoid the evil. They can include the joy and the sorrows, but then the irascible is the emergency passions that arise when, so like for instance, daring, fear, is what Thomas Aquinas is saying here. Does that make some sense there?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to go directly into the next part that we're going to
Okay.
be talking about. So there's 11 passions in the mind: love, hatred, desire, horror, joy, grief, hope, despair, boldness, fear, and anger. But are these passions, because we're going to be getting into like distractions, worldly distractions from the natural spiritual unfoldment, and aren't like, passions in a way just like a distraction?
Most of the time they are. Now the ones that you, I don't have that list in front of me. Are we
Obviously,
still in
the first
mechanics of
one is
karma?
not. Yeah, we're in the mechanics of karma. I mean, the first one is love. So, I mean, but hatred, desire, horror,
Okay.
joy, joy and love. And we just like lived in that, that'd be great. But grief, hope, despair, boldness, fear, and anger.
Okay.
So these are the 11 passions of the mind. It's just followed up after the concupiscible and the irascible.
Concupiscible.
Yeah.
Concupiscible.
I think I pronounced that 11 different ways.
Oh, here we are. I see where you're getting that. So for instance, so this is speaking about like the irascible powers that rise into revenge, or things that rise into injury or hurts or anger. And so what they find are these passions. Most of these passions that they're living here, that they're listing here, are, other than love, are of a pretty negative variety, except for love and grief. There's joy, but the rest of and hope, but there's also hatred, desire, horror, despair, boldness, fear, and anger. The passions themselves, and this is what you have to, this is the difficult part, and this is part of why the initiations are so important. The passions themselves, in their proper place, are not bad. They become an evil because of what we do with them. You see, so let's say, for instance, first of all, if someone loves their spouse, of course, they're going to have desire for their spouse and love and joy and hope and all that. If someone loses their child, they're going to grieve, or if they lose someone they love, they're going to grieve. These are natural human emotions, which are not in and of themselves negative. So if someone goes through something like, let's say, someone loses a child through murder, they're going to experience all the rest of those. And in its proper place, they are completely appropriate. And I think anyone who has children can empathize to the fact that that would take a great deal of discipline to keep those emotions in a state of moderation. I know that I don't know that I would be moderate. you know, there, but for the grace of God, go I, so we have to remember that there are always circumstances in this world that bring up these types of things and the proper moderate expression of these. Emotions are not of themselves bad. It is the immoderate expression of those emotions which becomes deleterious to the spiritual progress of the soul. But again, and I want to just ask you again to remind me of the original direction of that question, because I want to make sure I'm going in that right direction here.
Well, we were going
About
from
those.
the irascible
And the concupiscible.
concupiscible,
I
and
got
then,
it down now.
and then we were going, and then the next thing after that, they were talking about the 11 passions in the mind.
Okay, yeah,
so,
and so these 11 passions are being presented in the context of this particular quotation. Let me just pull it up here. Okay, so even here at the beginning of the quote, says the passions of the human mind are nothing else but certain motions or inclinations proceeding from the apprehension of anything as of good or evil, convenient or inconvenient. And so these apprehensions are three sorts: the sensual, rational, and intellectual. And then it goes into a lot of different explanations of these various manifestations, and then it explains all of these, but it talks about the irascible power rising into revenge, so to speak. And this is the kind of thing that they are talking about. So even grief can become immoderate, and a person can seek revenge depending on what happened. Even grief can become immoderate in the sense that a person becomes so deeply depressed that they need additional help, and they need professional help to assist them in pulling themselves out of the deep hole that they're in with this grieving. And that would be a normal manifestation of grief. And so we want to be sure that we're not demonizing human emotion. What we're doing is acknowledging that any emotion or feeling or passion that is expressed immoderately can become a grave evil or an evil of a lesser nature, and there's all sorts of variations of it. And it can become a true impediment to the path of God. For instance, if you become obsessed with revenge for something, well, there went 90% of your space for doing something else that would be creative and useful. You know?
Yeah. So for me, I was, I think that, a lot of people are impeded when it comes to emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've studied with a person named Eric Morris. He's
Okay.
he's an acting person who's been teaching for over 50 years in LA. And so his whole thing was people's impediment to being able to express themselves. And so there's like a method for actors, but it only works for 2% of the actors, because the other 98% of humans, actors, whatever, have blocks, emotional blocks. Sometimes it can be incoming, where they can't really take it in fully. There's certain blocks they have, and for some people they can't express it without it being filtered in some way. And so his whole thing was about opening people up emotionally, and that, you know, one should be able to freely be able to feel and express all emotions A to Z, and not put any kind of emotional, you know, value on anything. And but when someone gets stuck on a certain note, like one's just angry all the time,
Right.
then he would just call him on it and be like, hey, you're just being angry all the time. Or, you know, if someone's like, hooty dooty doo, I'm like this, they'd be like, all right, we got to get you angry. Let's get you down. Let's have you yell at your dad. Just pretend your dad's right here and you yell at him and free up that energy. And so I feel like, you know, it's such an important part of being human.
Right.
Another note is Yogi Bhajan was one of my teachers, and he said that women are 36 times more intelligent than men because you know, when they had the crayon box in kindergarten, they had the one with 128 of them, you know, as colors of emotion, you know, and men had like the 8 or the 12 or the 16, you know? And so I think that is true. It's like there's a certain emotional intelligence that women have, and it's fostered in them, and not so much in men. There's a whole other intelligence with the, you know, emotional intelligence. And so yeah, this is a, you know, the 11 passions to me, I don't know, you know, it can be a worldly distraction for sure, if, you know, or a distraction if they're like stuck in a pattern with something, like you said, with grief, and you're just in grief all the time. You know, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we gotta get you out of that. You know, so a lot of us are gonna be
Well,
stuck in
but
certain
when you're
patterns, right?
dealing with grief too, though, just to put it out there,
Yeah.
you know, most people who go through significant loss, they need 3 to 5 years just to go through the stages process. So they're going to be going through some of those stages for a while, and different people will process it differently. But yes, during those periods, you want to do everything you can to help them if and when they are ready to do. But you know, it just depends on the degree of the loss as well, because grief is a difficult thing. It's a really tough thing.
Yeah, to heal and to express that, and even like, you know, fear, because we can look at PTSD. And I worked with this guy who was a savant, I guess you would say, and he was a ballet dancer, but he could read people's muscle recruitment patterns. Just by, he would know how many muscles that they're activating in their body just by looking at them. That was his genius.
Wow,
He couldn't look at your
that's
face.
interesting.
Yeah, he wouldn't know what you're feeling by looking at your face, though. He didn't have, it wasn't there in his head. But you know, he could tell if somebody was angry at their mother by the way they held their body.
Really?
Yeah. So what he would do is he'd work with like veterans and stuff, because a lot of times they'd have it locked in their spine, you know, that PTSD. And, you know, so their nervous system would be locked in there. So he had to physically start to work out that emotion that's locked in there, right? So there's different ways that we start to break down those emotional patterns as well. But I want to move on for a second, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I want to read this, worldly distractions, because I don't know, I think I preemptively brought that up. I don't think it had anything to do with 11 passions, but so worldly distraction from the natural spiritual unfoldment and the soul's destiny can be anything from bad habits, technology, sins, cravings, perturbability to the world below, inability to concentrate on the one true spirit of life, which leads to the liberation of the soul. Distractions need to be monitored. And like, who isn't distracted?
Especially in today's world, it's a bigger deal now because of technology. But it is, people can be distracted so easily, and that's how you've got to watch that stuff really strongly, because there is a part in our nature that would almost like to come up with anything else to do other than the work of life.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you know, I think I'll go do this, and we tell ourselves, well, that's okay. It was an important thing to do. And, but we really have to do some value judgments on, are we just distracting ourselves to um, not use all the time that we should use better? Or are we legitimately, utilizing our time or coming up with lots of distractions? But people can be totally distracted just by their own thoughts, just by their, you can get distracted just by watching the news every day. You can be distracted by paying attention too much to, um, people complaining in the streets, and then you can completely get unfocused. Ironically, even in today's world, you got to be careful of that, because we can get distracted just by this idea of all this social reform, and we don't realize that this social reform isn't going to happen by people complaining all the time. People got to go out and do something. So, so everyone's distracted complaining about all the things that need to change, but they're not doing it, so that's what we have to look at. Okay, am I wasting my time, or am I doing something useful, creative, something that will actually move forward the spiritual path, the initiations, or am I just finding things to do that take me away from it because I'm burned out and overwhelmed?
Yeah,
Which can happen.
or it feels good, it's entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it's good. Life is, it's a wonderful gift, and we need to enjoy ourselves. But I think, in the bigger perspective of things, wow, it's like, if we got to, just if we can touch base at least with our spiritual journey and our spiritual life, to make sure that we're not getting so far away.
Right.
Because, like, my wife and I will, watch something on Netflix or something, right, and be entertained. And hey, we're together and we're being entertained, and hey,
Yeah.
this is delicious food, and and that's all good. It's a part of life, but at the end of the day, end of our life, it's really, what's our spiritual bank account gonna look
Right.
like, right? Um,
Right.
the last thing I wrote down about this chapter is the importance. It's more of a question: importance of detachment. And I guess that's related to the distractions, maybe.
Yeah, and it's there's a value judgment that has to go into what things in your life need to be detached from. So, like, if you're a news junkie, if you have the news on 24/7, that's probably something to take a look at. If you are uh, some kind of other television junkie, are you addicted to serial shows or whatever, reality shows, doesn't mean you have to give it up. It's a matter of finding the right balance and moderation. I have certain things that I just really like, and I have to find a balance, because otherwise I would just be like, find a reason to engage in the things I just want to play around with, and I never get anything done. So and so we have to kind of be our own little monitors on all those things.
Okay, because I guess I took detachment in a different way, because I am Aquarius, and I astrologically, my sun, moon, Mercury, and rising sign are all astrology. So what that means, like, when my wife met me, she's like, "Oh, well, maybe we can be friends," because Aquarians are known to be very detached. And then
Ah,
so I didn't mean detach. I mean, for me, the meaning came up as like, oh, so you're just detached from all those things, as opposed to
right.
attached to the distractions. You're just like, oh, there's a distraction. Well, I got no attachment to that. Let me go over here and I'll choose to do this. So that's kind
Well,
of,
and that's right, because I kind of lost the I kind of lost the thought in my head, so I went on my own rampage.
no,
But
that was a good perspective too, because we do detach, a lot of us, from, not only what's most important, but from other people, from how we feel inside of ourselves, our
yeah,
relationships, all of that. Yeah, that was a very important point. This is just another perspective.
But the detachment that I'm speaking of in that chapter is about detaching from the we become very attached to the ground. We become attached in an unhealthy way to things or relationships or things, whatever it might be, and so, when we go from, this whole thing of being a person to an awareness, this is where detachment really means something. It's because in detachment, we're able to sit in awareness because our personality is not projecting out all of these threads of what I think, what I feel, and all this kind of stuff. You're able to actually be kind of more separated, and you're actually able to hear more of what other people are thinking and feeling. But the detachment is a spiritual detachment that the initiations take you through and you develop it. It's an energetic thing where it's not the unhealthy detachment that we don't want. We don't want people to detach from their families or detach from their kids or detach. We want people to understand detachment as being no longer as attached to the things of the world, attached to the things that are impermanent. We become more interested in that which is immortal rather than that which is mortal, the things that pass away. And so we detach from the worldly things that we used to put so much energy and time into, because we now realize that it's not a good use of our resources to put so much into those impermanent things. And we put more of that into that which is immortal and eternal, the things that last forever from this world to the next, the things that are not a fragment of something. So this is hard to put into words, but the Dalai Lama talks about this a lot. It's taught a lot in Buddhism. So those who are listening who are followers of Buddhism will understand what is meant by this. But it's detachment from worldly desires, and that's a Christian concept too. I think they just use a slightly different turn of phrase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think maybe we should stop right there before we move into the next chapter on the mechanics of energy.
Okay.
And we'll pick this back up next week, if that's okay with you.
That sounds good. That sounds good.
How's the temperature over there? Is it like 185?
Yeah, I think it's about 187.
187 now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like 100 here, but it's supposed to be 110 tomorrow or something. Crazy. Yeah, and I got this light like shining on me, like, whenever you're talking and the camera's not on me, I'm like, well, it was great talking to you. Thank you for your time today.
You too.
I'll send
So
some
enjoy your trip to wherever, and I hope it's a good beach somewhere.
Yeah,
and
yeah, enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, you too.